Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar on equipping public servants to succeed. The webinar shall begin shortly. So hello everybody and welcome, good morning, to this Global Government Forum webinar looking at how to equip public servants to succeed. My name is Richard Johnston and I'm the executive editor of Global Government Forum, which is a media and events company focused on bringing public and civil servants from around the world, and in today's case particularly from Canada, together to share best practice and insight. And this webinar is on a very interesting and pertinent topic to that sharing of information. There's been massive upheaval, I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience, in how public servants work over the last 4 years, from the move to remote working during the coronavirus pandemic to now the impact of financial pressures and increasing demand on all of what government does. And responding to these pressures requires public servants to have the right skills and governments to have the right systems and infrastructure in place. So we thought that it would be great to get public servants together to discuss how government can equip their public servants to succeed in the very difficult environment that we currently operate in. This webinar is part of Global Government Forum's Accelerate Gov event programme, and last year at the Accelerate Gov conference, which Global Government Forum organises in partnership with the Government of Canada, we had a session looking at how government can have the modern tools and systems that they need. And we thought that it would be great to bring Canadian public servants back together again to look at this topic afresh and consider the systems and skills that public services need now and in the future. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We have a great panel to take part in this discussion, and I also want to invite you to take part. Please do get involved by putting a question to our panel. What skills do you need to make the most of working in government, and how can government provide you with the tools you need? Please get in touch using the Q&A function throughout the session, and we will put the questions to our panel once we have heard some opening thoughts from them. You should be able to find the Q&A button on the Zoom app. However, whatever platform you are using, just click on it and please submit a question. So to our panel then, let me introduce them and then we shall hear some opening thoughts. First joining us today, we have Megan Collins. Megan is the Chief of the Enterprise Information Management and Corporate Services Sector of the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Megan holds a master's degree in both library and information science, as well as political science, and has gained expertise in information architecture, data governance, life cycle management and digitization initiatives in both the public and private sector throughout her career. So welcome, Megan. We're also joined today by Elizabeth Rodenizer, the Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer at the Association of Professional Executives of the Public Service of Canada, APEX. Elizabeth has over 26 years of experience in cybersecurity, IT operations and transformation, as well as government policy and Strategy. She served as champion for the Indigenous Circle at Shared Services Canada while Chief Information Officer, and was the Women's Network Champion at the Public Service Commission of Canada too. Today, Elizabeth leads the APEX Executive Work and Health Study in collaboration with researchers and works with executives and government departments and agencies to evolve the health and well-being cultures around government for today's executives and tomorrow's leaders. So again, great experience for this conversation. Welcome, Elizabeth. And also with us today is Lauren Hunter, Director of Talent Policy and Programmes in the Office of the Chief Information Officer of Canada in the Treasury Board Secretariat. Lauren and her team design and develop modern talent platforms that support excellence in public service recruitment, as well as ensuring equity advancement, and has a focus on results. Lauren holds a directorate in human rights and has spent the past decade applying this lens to digital government initiatives so as to prioritise inclusion, human experience, and the delivery, of measurable concrete outcomes for Canadians. So it's a great panel to have this discussion. I'm really excited to be chairing it today. And as I say, please do get your questions in because we will have some time for questions. But first, we'll hear some opening thoughts, and Megan is going to kick us off. Megan.
Sure, great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Richard. And thanks everybody for joining us today. As we had said, I'm the Chief of Information Management within Treasury Board. So I'm going to kind of approach my remarks as sort of a practitioner. So not necessarily as a policy shaper, but one that's kind of really dealing with these sort of issues and questions in my day-to-day job. Every day we're getting more and more questions, and we're really getting inundated by our client base of people and public servants looking for solutions and digital solutions to a lot of our common problems. It happened quite quickly during the pandemic, and I think governments have always been really fantastic at being able to pivot quickly in a crisis. But how do we continue that momentum and continue to be innovative and really push the boundaries and move forward today and kind of continue that going forward? So there's a lot of that is coming out, and obviously artificial intelligence is one of the main things that we hear a lot, and the different tools around that space. But there's so much that kind of comes into that about really trying to still tying it to the problem. And it's people that really do that work. It's the people who really think about the why and what solution is actually going to fit the problem and really going to help. These things we're really in a more with less. I think we're all sort of feeling the financial, sort of the fiscal austerity measures. And so how do we do things the most effectively, use our tools most effectively, spend our dollars as effectively as we can with the tools and the solutions that are going to work. And so it's really bringing people together to kind of do that work, do those assessments, and fit people to tools and fit problems to tools. There's quite a bit out there. Our vendor partners are always very quick to show all their new tools, but it's been quite challenging to kind of piece together what's going to make the most sense. Obviously, with government procurement, there's a lot that goes into that as well, and there are really good rules for why we do things, but in a digital space can be really difficult to sort of contend with. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but it really, like I said, comes down to the people being able to manage those things and give good advice and sort of do that work. And we're definitely going to be experiencing more challenges, I think, in that space within our digital community as far as attracting new talent, retaining talent within the digital environment. But one of the things that I've really kind of focused on that I think is important is actually making partnerships with a lot of our community partners like universities and really recruiting students as they're coming out of these universities with really great and bright ideas and utilizing these technologies already in their day-to-day and thinking about things, I think, in a really great lens of thinking about climate goals and thinking about sort of the social cultural aspects of things. It's really fantastic to see. So we've really been partnering those things, getting people getting active early in their careers. I started off as a student within the public service, and I'm still here almost 20 years later. So it's something that I really love and I really believe in. And I think it's a way that we can sort of continue those pipelines of good digital talent within government, especially with some of the additional constraints we're going to have. I think the other part too, kind of on the more with less that I think about is how do we really collaborate with other departments and other organizations and other government departments really to be successful, because we are doing a lot of the same things. And quite often, and I know we always say this, but the working in silos, but we do that. And so, how do we better engage with our community partners and with our other government departments to really share our lessons learned, to really talk about what's been working for us? Not everyone's going to start from the same place or end in the same place, but what lessons can we provide? What work has already been done that we can share? Us at TBS, we've done a major initiative doing migrations from one information system to another, and we've been having major collaboration sessions with multiple other departments to share that. And it's been really rewarding to see what we're able to accomplish when we work together. So events like this in Excel Gov, I really appreciate very much, because it kind of creates those networking groups to talk about these things, to share information, because we're kind of all moving in the same direction. We're all grappling with the struggles of having good digital tools, of equipping our people as well to be able to deliver on those. And so I think working together and having these sorts of conversations is extremely important. So I think those are my first remarks, and I'll leave it to my colleagues to continue.
Great, thank you, Megan. Really fantastic opening remarks there, really setting the scene of the challenge of working trying to do more with less, and the importance of really sharing the lessons learned on what works and what doesn't, and also touching on the kind of tools that people can have in government to help them do that around artificial intelligence and elsewhere, but fixing the tools to the actual challenges and to the people, rather than trying to fix people to kind of predefined tools. And it all comes down to people. That often comes up a lot in these conversations. This is a people business more than it is almost anything else. Thank you. Really interesting opening comments, and I'll now go to Elizabeth for her reflections.
Thank you so much. So Raquel, if we could go to the second one, perfect. There is richness in collaborating beyond our organization when we look to barriers and opportunities of introducing better tech and systems to public servants. We cannot forget to make sure we identify and learn from the lessons of past operations or projects, and we heard Megan just mention that. In 2019, I established a pilot project with 8 other digital leaders across government to partner with Dalhousie University. Our goal was to see how we could work together to share with the workforce of the future government context, lessons learned already, and operating environments before they became employees or service providers or designers of a future application to be adopted in the public sector. Next slide, please. When I took the role of CIO at the Public Service Commission, there was a project commonly referred to as APRAT. By that time, the project was in its 7th year. I was told when I joined, it could not fail. I remember a conversation with my colleague a number of months later, and they were the business owner. And I asked them, what problem are we addressing for you and your team? They looked at me straight in the eyes and said, Elizabeth, you told me we had to do this. Me being the CIO at the time. I knew at that point that a tech-driven project that didn't work with the client to identify business improvements and opportunities was not on the best footing. We need to look beyond the typical bright and shiny social media moments and really take a look at leveraging the untapped value of hindsight to understand opportunities and barriers. At the PSC, APRAT gave us such an opportunity. Under the auspice of the pilot, we wanted to learn from this evaluation, but we also wanted to share it with the workforce of the future in a way they could leverage it. So we partnered with the Institute of Public Administration Canada and Dr. Jonathan Kraft, Associate Professor at U of T, to write a case study that would be posted on Open Government and could be used by anyone, academia or otherwise, in addition to the Public Service Commission. The goal was to understand the lessons learned from APRAT through the eyes of the people from both the technical and business perspectives. APRAT was well suited to showcase the complexities of going digital in the public sector, being a multi-decade-old, homegrown, distributed legacy system with numerous and often surprising challenges in data migration, given the end users often improvised workarounds with the data to meet client needs. In the end, we brought the first case study to our departmental audit committee to share the findings, and PSC eventually published a second case study, given the amount of material Jonathan and his team collected. Next slide, please. At the PSC, the IT team migrated nearly 100% on-site workforce to nearly 100% remote workforce in less than 10 weeks during COVID. And one of the key aspects here was creating space. Capacity is finite, and yet demand for IT and digital services seems to be infinite. Our biggest communication success was assisting management tables to realize the workload of our tech teams was well beyond capacity. This was a game changer in reorienting the conversation on prioritization. Real prioritization, rather than just saying something isn't funded and continuing to work on it anyway. The next lessons I've taken from my experience at SSC as a business owner and operator of enterprise services. Remove the churn. You need to take the noise that can be caused by pet projects, multiple briefings, and reports that may have limited reach or impact, and question the need for them, or consider options to meet the need with less burden on employees while working with employees to get their ideas as well. This is important as it diminishes the interruption and increases the time for deep work so needed. Finally, everyone plays a role in successful delivery of operations, programs, or projects, and it can take what seems to be like multiple orchestras playing the same song to deliver on some of these projects. One of our projects in 2020 was to deliver a modern cloud-based enterprise email service with over 20 organizations. There was doubt that we could achieve it, but we completed it by carrying out a matrix of work, innovations, and collaboration that was masterful because of the people that delivered on those components. And appreciating the people and teams responsible for the success day in and day out of this project was such a daily practice for me, right until we closed out. I witnessed people on calls juggling caregiving or being ill, and I know the importance, just as all of us do, the need to be able to reach out to them directly and they'll let them know it's okay and important for them to take care of themselves and that we, their teams, have their back. Next slide, please. Finally, whether it is AI or another emerging technology, we need to create the environment where people can successfully innovate and deliver on business needs with any technology. Within APEX, our executive work and health study is unique. It looks at the underlying determinants of workplace health and the pathways of causality. Our study has provided evidence to leaders that the health outcomes of executives is more affected by the health of the organization than one's own individual choices. I'm going to talk about our 2021 study. Just a couple of highlights, because we identified the top 3 areas to focus on to improve organizational health and those of executives. First off, inclusion, which we at APEX consider a sense of belonging, a voice at the table, a role in decision-making, and concrete investment in the executive. Now, the 2021 results study illustrate that 1 in 4 executives report a lack of inclusion, and this goes to 1 in 3 for equity-deserving groups. Our research further shows that to increase inclusion, we need to focus on supervisor support and psychological safety. Psychological safety is not a soft skill or an HR term. Psychological safety has 2 decades of research behind it and evidence that shows it is directly linked to innovation, productivity, and learning, all things we need in digital. In 2012, Google's Project Aristotle concluded that psychological safety was critical to making a team work more than anything else. And lastly, our study shows that recognition is the most potent driver, which creates the most negative effects by both increasing undesirable outcomes and by reducing desirable ones. And yet the proportion of executives reporting negative work-home interference was the highest since 2002, with 69% of executives reporting a lack of recognition, and that rose to 74% of equity-seeking groups. And yet, how do we do this? What do we do to improve this effort, reward, and balance? We need to address work-home interruptions. We need to talk about operational hours, and I'll leave that for another question maybe, but also we need to balance high effort by equally high rewards. And this isn't just paying people. Paying people, as Jennifer Moss in the Burnout Epidemic says, is corporate hygiene. We need to do it. It's like brushing our teeth. And work-home interruption has negative interruptions have negative impact on multiple fronts. But it comes down to that we need to make sure that we are recognizing extra hours and not continuously putting that on people and having them avoid personal commitments. And supervisor support must be built into the culture. Last slide, please. Leadership of days gone by is not the leadership we need today. We need to evolve as a community, and we need leaders at all levels to be vulnerable. It's okay not to know everything or have all the answers. Work with others to find them and what are the best options. And we need to have what used to be seen as soft skills, which are now key skills: empathy, humility, kindness, and focus on creating psychologically safe spaces. If we want people to succeed in technology and evolve in the digital government landscape, we need to evolve our culture to support their success and in turn the success of the public service and the people we serve. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's a great presentation following on from Megan's, I think, talking about the actual lessons learned from your career, that capacity is finite, and that there needs to be real prioritization to make things work in government, and that everybody plays a key role, in the importance of acknowledging success as well, which I think is something that's really important, both in Canada and the governments around the world. That highlights from the Executive Work and Health study as well are really interesting, particularly on how to make a team work. Thank you very much for those reflections. I'm sure that we will dig into some of those in the questions, and just another reminder, please do submit your questions to our panel, because we will be getting to them after we hear from Lauren. Lauren.
Thanks, Richard. Can folks hear me okay? Okay. So I do a fair number of talks, and I found this one difficult to prep for. And one of the reasons was, I think when we look at the way the public service in Canada and also around the world, we look at digital nations, we look at nations that are not part of that community, and the way folks have responded to the pandemic, I think public sectors around the world have demonstrated just a tremendous amount of intellectual and corporate social athleticism in terms of their ability to respond. And yet, when we bounce off the pandemic, when we go forward from here, wherever I go, there's this persistent feeling of meh or angst, or like, it just feels to me that there's almost something tangible out there going on that is making people feel like they are less interested in the learning and unsure how to engage and unsure about how to bring technologies into their organization. And that's not new, but it's such a pervasive level, and it doesn't matter if you're an executive or you're a new entry employee. And I had the fortunate opportunity to be in London with Global Government Forum a few months ago, and talking to colleagues from other jurisdictions. This was something that was coming out there as well. And I think there's something, there's a great deal of value in what Elizabeth mentioned about psychological safety, but I think there's something happening in the public sector that we're not acknowledging on a wide scale. And that is that I think that our citizen populations and us as citizens of a country, and also as public servants who are then responsible for protecting the residents and the citizens of a country in terms of how we do our jobs and protecting the public interest. I think there's a great deal of anxiety about the future and where we are at right now. And I don't think as organizations, we're very good at talking about this. We're right now facing tremendous amount of, obviously, climate disruption, socioeconomic disruption. We have levels of geopolitical conflict at a scale that we haven't really seen in a very long time. And this led me to start taking a look at some of the research for when has this happened before. This is not new, right? Humanity goes through cycles. And one of the things I started doing was reading back in the 1950s about just some of the the journal articles and the things that were published and what was going on psychologically in the 1950s, when people were really deeply anxious about the threat of basically a nuclear holocaust. And I think right now we're living in a time period where the presence of AI is super promising, but there's also a tremendous amount of anxiety about what that's going to mean for human future. Same thing with climate, same thing with war, with inflation. And I think we need to find better ways of dealing with that. So when I look at the literature from the 1950s, a lot of it's very disturbing. A lot of it's, have 3 or 4 glasses of wine when you get home from work, participate in social things that are perhaps not productive. And I look now at where we are in history, and I think we have so much more resilience and research to draw on. And I think that as organizations, it's not a question of, can we find a cool tech? Can we adopt a cool tech? There's always going to be cybersecurity reviews and stuff that has to happen. But on a mass scale, I think regardless of finding tech, we have to have the psychological curiosity, we have to have the energy levels, we have to have the time to play with this stuff, to learn how to use it, to learn how to get good at it. How many of us have already started to learn prompt engineering for AI? Or is that something we're really not familiar with? How many of us are anxious about how many of our functions may be consumed, or broader things in society? So I think for me, when I'm looking at where the public service is right now and where we need to be, I think we need to start building into our models, our services, whether it's recruitment. So I run the recruitment platform team, whether it's what we're thinking about what's on our users' minds, whether we're thinking about cybersecurity, whether I'm thinking about the health and well-being of my own team. I think nationally, we have to start building into our frameworks this concept of instability. And how are we going to draw best lessons? Fabulous Japanese philosophy from like the 16th century around resilience and building forward. We find it in places in Africa and American research institutions and in the 1990s. Like, there's some tremendous research at our disposal about how to bounce forward in the state of conflict and in the state where not only our own teams, but also the populations we serve may be dealing with high levels of anxiety and uncertainty. And I think that our biggest challenge isn't the AI and the cost of inflation or reduced public service resources. I think our biggest challenge en masse is, how do we learn to feel good about adaptation? How do we learn to be more responsive, to be comfortable with a higher level of disruption, and develop the sort of psychological strength to support not only our own selves, but the populations we serve in that. So that's my thoughts on this.
Thank you, Lauren. That's really, really interesting. That comparison with the 1970s sounds very stark, but when you put it in the terms that you just did, I think it really will chime with people. It definitely did with me, and I think there's something about building in that how to feel good about adaptation and the psychological curiosity that you mentioned as well, and kind of acknowledging the fact that the uncertainty and the pressures that we currently face are not likely to diminish anytime soon, and building systems that can deal with that. Thank you all very much for your opening reflections. As I said, we will be taking some questions. I'm just going to kick off the conversation by perhaps asking, we'll go around the speakers in the order they give their opening statements, asking about the opportunities, I guess. I think from the opening comments, we can see the potential for opportunities in government systems that are more attuned to the pressures of the day, and more attuned in in supporting public servants in delivering in these uncertain times. Perhaps starting with you, Megan, can you see a roadmap to kind of unlocking that, and is how big a component is kind of technology in that picture in helping us become more resilient?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tool set, right? It's ever evolving, it's changing, kind of what we were saying, and getting people comfortable with change. I remember being a part of an organization that did sort of leadership training, and it was always one of the biggest, issues is that people don't like change necessarily, and as you get further in your career, you tend to like it a little less. So it's one of those things you kind of have to deal with, because the one thing that is very consistent, I think Elizabeth had in her slide, was what the only thing that's constant is change. And so how do you deal with that, right? And I think I saw in the chat someone was kind of asking too about change management. And I think it's extremely important. I think we're doing somewhat of a better job of talking about it, but I also think we talk about change management a lot in a way of how do we get sort of our client base comfortable with the change. We're bringing in new technology. How are they going to be able to adopt it? How is this going to change? But I don't necessarily always know we do such a great job of actually bringing our own people along and doing change management internally. I have a lot of staff, multi-generational staff, people who have been here for quite a long time, that are saying, where do I fit in the new digital environment? I was hired, 20, 30 years ago. My job was this. I don't see it anymore. I don't necessarily understand where I fit going forward. How can I still contribute and feel value? We work in the public service so often because we feel value in what we're doing in our service, in our day to day. We spend so much of our lives working. We want to make sure we're contributing to something we believe in. So how can I still do that in a digital space? And it's really about having those conversations and not shying away from it. The skill set is still so important. The expertise and what you bring forward is still so important. And that's going to shape the tools. I mean, AI machine learning has to learn from something. We want to put good information and good data in, and that's going to come from what people are putting and reviewing. So, and again, kind of what I had said in the beginning, but really fitting it to the problem too, right? So often people can come to you and be like, I want Copilot, I want this. And you're like, okay, for what? What's the problem we're solving? Where are you currently facing? What is the challenge we're trying to solve? And let's talk about that a little bit. What do we have that's already available? To say that you're not going to use technology and it's not going to be a solution, it would be silly. It absolutely is going to be. But the right technology and making those choices and how you're going to apply them is also going to be really important. Even having conversations around ChatGPT, we boil the ocean every time we ask it a question. It's searching through huge swaths of data and doesn't necessarily reflect our green and government goals as well. There's a huge ecological footprint to a lot of these technologies. So how do we actually scale this thing down so it's still beneficial and helpful, but not necessarily at the scale where it's incredibly expensive and it's extremely wasteful on our resources and not consistent with the other values of the government and us as within the public service. So I think there's major opportunities there. I think it's going to take time for sure. I think it's participating in conversations with private sector as well, sort of learning what they're kind of doing, and it's really learning together. We're all sort of grappling with this at the same time. And I think we're also understanding sort of the risks and realizations of these as well. So I think there's a huge opportunity. I think absolutely technology needs to be applied on a lot of these things, but it's the asking the underlying questions of why and making sure people feel that they're part of that process and still their expertise is extremely valuable in those conversations.
And thanks very much, Megan. Yeah, Elizabeth, I was struck by your comment in your opening remarks about not necessarily being distracted by or focusing purely on kind of the latest technological development, but looking more at the overall organizational capacity and how to match resources to what you're trying to do. I mean, do you have any thoughts building on what Megan said about how you can fit technology to the problem, how you can identify the problems that you might have as an organization and where the technological fit is, rather than just going with the latest kind of shiny innovation?
Yeah, great question. So I want to kind of bring it back to what Lauren said as well, and how the researchers I'm working with describe it is we are in a VUCA world right now. a world that is marked by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when we look at this, what do we have to do whether it's emerging tech or otherwise? Don't start with the tech. I think we can look at so many business cases when we start with the tech as kind of the why, going back to what Megan said, there is a high rate of failure. So we actually need to look at three components here. We have to look at the business, the tech, and the people. And I think we can't look at one of these streams in isolation. If we're not taking a holistic approach at whatever we're trying to achieve and going with either the business problem or opportunity we're trying to solve or take advantage of, we're going to miss it. And we're going to be yet another one of those tech failures, if you want, that didn't meet the needs or the expectations of people and of clients. And I think, Megan mentioned it, people are so fundamental. So I talk a lot about creating psychological space and the optimal kind of environment for people, because we are in these uncertain times. Even before I took this job last fall to do this work, working at SSC, we were still in the question of prescribed presence in the workplace. So, the approach was to make myself available and to go talk with managers, to listen to what they had to say, to see how I can support them. It's not solving anything in that moment, and it's not technical. But if I can't create the space where they can be heard, where I can hear that most of their day is taken by talking with employees who are just consumed by this, then I'm not helping them kind of have that space to either ideate or find opportunities and then go and be able to do what they need to do to support operations and programs and projects with their teams. So I think, the one thing of thinking this is tech, go and deploy it, it's going to be wonderful and the world's going to change. I think we have evolved as a digital community, and I think, we need to work as a kind of a collective to make sure that those three streams of people, tech and business, are evolving at the same time. I have more to say, but I'll hand it over to Lauren.
Great, thanks. And yeah, your thoughts on that, Lauren, as well, perhaps. And I was thinking, from your comments about the amount of change that organizations have faced. But I wonder, is there a good news story in there somewhere that a lot of organizations have delivered incredible things in the pressures that they face, and perhaps we can take the lessons from the adaptation that we've already done and looking to apply that to kind of harness the opportunities that might lie out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I think the world that we're facing right now, when I get stuck, my go-to move is just to sort of lean into what's human. I think when the pandemic hit, it was so disruptive. But the most amazing thing that came out of that was that we collectively really rediscovered our purpose. We really, as a public service, doubled down on the idea that we had to do what was best for citizens. We really understood that things that were going to be given attention and effort were going to be the ones that were the most impactful, that they needed to be delivered with speed, that there needed to be rigor wherever possible, but that bureaucracy should not precede the national interest. I think as we face this volatile environment, and as the communities that we serve also face this volatile environment, there is a collective opportunity in all of that anxiety about what's coming for us collectively to rediscover our purpose. And that the purpose is, in the face of what is coming or may not be coming, right? Which is the big issue. We don't know what's coming. We have the opportunity collectively to say, we are all responsible now for learning to be more adaptive. And that means we all have to be shepherds and facilitators of the change, whether that's testing AI if it's appropriate for your team, or helping other teams who are less technologically enabled or maybe a little bit more stuck in older ways of working, learn how to get access to the tools, or inspiring them to get engaged, helping folks figure out where their energy and their mental space banks are so that they can get back in there. But the common purpose is there. The common purpose is that we have to collectively get better at shepherding the change, and that we can lean in together and share a lot. And the public service can do that internally. We can also do that with citizens, not just for citizens, but with citizens and with residents, to figure out how we shape the country.
Great, thank you very much. That's an excellent response. I'm going to move to the questions that have been submitted. Megan alluded to one that's came in from Penelope Baker, but I want to also put it to Elizabeth as well. Penelope asks about, she says, I'm just going to condense this slightly, Penelope. I find myself always wondering when senior management will be required to start taking change management training, especially since a large component of successful change management relies on them being able to explain the why of change and championing the helping champion a desire for change. I wondered, Elizabeth, from your point of view at Apex, is change management something that you provide, that you find that public service leaders are kind of embracing or looking for more of? Where do you think that people are in kind of getting the management skills and proactively seeking out the management skills that are needed?
So it's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer with regard to what we're doing right now in that area. It is another portfolio, but what I can speak to is my own experience. And I think when we look at change management, we don't always have to be a Swiss Army knife, right? So I don't have to be the one who's the business leader and the project manager and the change manager. For some of our projects within government, they're so complex that we need multiple leads, and we need people who actually have the expertise that work in these roles to champion through because of that complexity. So, and that's what we did in our migration to the cloud for our enterprise email management services. I will tell you that I had my colleague who was leading the project side. We had change management there as well. And it was the orchestration of us collectively working together that was a success. So in some cases, can one person be a Swiss Army knife? I think the project is reasonable. And if operations aren't also on the shoulder of that person, but I think we need to look at how are we incorporating and achieving change management to ensure that it's there. That's the fundamentality. Whether everybody is change management experts, I'm not sure that that's the way to go necessarily, but knowing the importance and where to go to get the support to ensure that in projects and operations that change management is there, I think that should be our ultimate collective goal.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. We've had a question in from Taha Tabish asking about flexible and remote working, which I was aware would be a question that would come up in this session. I know it's a big issue in Canada at the moment. Taha asks, in recent years, the Canadian public service has become more digital and more spread out across the country. This has significantly diversified the public service workforce, allowing talent to be drawn in from outside the National Capital Region. But Taha adds, there's a stark contrast between this and what seems to be a trend of increasing an in-office presence of public servants, with mention of the latest directive. So the question is there, considering that teams are now spread across the country and work is becoming ever more digital, how can these two things be reconciled? And is the public service hoping to go back to the way things were? I'll put it to Megan first, perhaps, and then round the rest of the panel if you want to comment. Is there a tension between the kind of office requirements and the kind of public service that has grown up in the years since the pandemic, or how can it be managed to help everyone succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. I came from a regional development agency at one point. I know how important it is to be able to have regional diversity in those viewpoints. And I think it really did enrich the public service to have opportunities from people throughout the country. We're a very big country, to have people from those areas. So it's going to be a challenge. And I think we're all kind of reconciling with it, to be honest. I can only really answer the question honestly. I think we're trying to find a way forward. I think a lot of organizations are, us and private sector included, of trying to find what the balance is going to be. But ultimately, this is the policy and we serve at the pleasure. So we've got to find a way that's going to work and go forward and make people, and kind of all to the points we've been talking about, how do we, still make ourselves, as diverse as we possibly can, keeping in mind those things, and how can we really equip ourselves to kind of still get really good talent and really do really good solutioning, with these kind of constraints. It is absolutely going to be a tension. I think we're still figuring it out. Um, and none of us really have all of the answers, but I think if you do your best, that's really the best that we can do. But I think it's a really good point, and I think we're all sort of grappling with it and what that's going to mean in the future. So I think having these conversations of how we can be successful and collaborate together is the best way we can really kind of work together to be able to work within those policy frameworks. Hopefully that helps answer the question. I know it's a tough one.
Yeah, I thought that was very useful. If I can come to you, Elizabeth, and ask whether there's any lessons or insight from the executive work and health study that you mentioned about managing remote teams and flexible teams and people in different locations, and kind of perhaps the best way for public service managers to kind of implement requirements for office based work as well.
So maybe 2 points I'll highlight. The first one is work home interruptions. So work home interruptions is, where after hours or after operations, where you're still getting pinged, you're still getting emails, you're still getting requests, whether or not there is an assumption that you're going to respond or not. When we're looking regionally, we have to assume and appreciate that when I start at 7 in the morning, my colleagues in Calgary or in BC did not already start. So I think it's the appreciation and utilization of technology, which can easily delay an email, and putting those together, just that kind of intention, if you will, to make sure that we're not always, setting up our meeting so that the East Coast is having lunch and we're meeting, or, the West Coast hasn't started yet. So I think those are some typical ones. However, I think we also have an opportunity to look at this from a human perspective. How we are developing managers and leaders, what we do is teach whatever their business or technology stream is. We need to branch beyond that. How do we engage in actually communicating and reading body language when we're a 2x2 screen? I think there's an opportunity here for us not to go beyond what a traditional manager or leader might have been, to how do we connect on a human level, whether we are in a room or if we are on screen, or a hybrid of both. And my one hope is we do this aggressively and with intention, so that we don't end up back to the Polycom days. Do you guys remember before the pandemic happened, the Polycom in the middle of the room and the poor person on it? They were on an island all on their own. We need to make sure that when people are on location or in hybrid, that everybody feels connected. So there's more examples there, and I'm sure my colleagues have them, but this is something that I think everybody can take kind of interest in and look to see, how can I be better tomorrow than I am today in this hybrid world as a leader and as a manager.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think that's a key point, isn't it? I think a lot of the office infrastructure, for want of a better term, the way that government works, the technology that it has available is structured or still kind of legacy from the before times, for the want of a better phrase, from pre-2020, and the kind of the infrastructure, the walls and windows of offices haven't been recalibrated in a lot of places to create the spaces that will allow for that kind of team building. I think that's a very very good point, and something that we cover at Global Government Forum quite a lot, because there are interesting work, but particularly in Canada, in fact, but also in governments around the world, where they are on that adaptation journey, making workspaces that work for a flexible working. But obviously, given the scale of the estate in a lot of these places, that is not the work of a moment. It's going to take a long time to kind of fit everything out right. Lauren, I'll just come to you to get your response on this topic as well. I mean, I know you touched on a lot of things about kind of psychological curiosity and feeling good about adaptation. So there is an element of kind of people adjusting to the change, perhaps, of being back in the office, but people might also feel it is another change that they have to deal with now.
Yeah, and I think the question of regional representation and where are the regions in all of this, and not just a regional office, but an employee in a part of Canada where there isn't a government office, but they still work for government. That, for me, is a big issue going forward. It's going to be something that we're going to be looking at directly. Our team actually was the only recognized remote work-enabled team at Treasury Board, other than the Canadian Digital Service, prior to the pandemic. So we've been remote work-enabled since 2017, when our team started at Treasury Board. Almost all of our developers on our platform are spread across Canada. It's easier to get the top talent from wherever the talent is, rather than saying, hey, this is the NCR, like, let's figure out who's in this tiny little bucket. But that's consistent with the direction that actually started with the Public Service Commission research around about 2004, 2005. They did a big study, and they basically said the public service is too national capital focused, and they made policy changes to say that jobs actually had to be advertised across the country. And at the time, the way that was envisioned and what the technology would allow for was that you could be recruited from anywhere, and then you would bring your regional perspectives with you, and you would come and work usually in the NCR, but sometimes in an office if you were in a department that had regional offices. Obviously, now the technology allows for people to be hired all over the place, but I think that sentiment that the Public Service Commission laid down 20 years ago is still incredibly relevant. We are a very broad country, and diversity just isn't about like EE figures. It's also about regional perspectives. It's about urban versus rural. We have a lot of our Indigenous population who find it difficult to engage if jobs require them to sit in a desk in the National Capital Region. I know we have an Indigenous community liaison on our team who's worked from community since 2018. So when we look at this issue, return to office is actually very much, I know, the Chief Human Resources Office would love to say that it's for everybody, but a lot of what has drawn the focus of that conversation is really about who's sitting in government desks when you're in a building where there's government desks. There's not a lot of advice or guidance that's been put out around regional hiring. And perhaps one of the reasons for this is that the decision to make a regional hire has not actually been in the policy impacted by return to office. So deputy ministers always retain the authority under the Financial Administration Act to make regionally based appointments and to accept a full-time telework agreement for regional hires. Some departments, this is common practice, so it's easy to work with them to develop recruitment strategies where they will pull in talent from anywhere, and they will have remote work enabled teams. I come before Treasury Board, I worked with Natural Resources Canada, and regional hiring is very significant there because the researchers are in the field and they're all across the country. Other departments, it's just a hard no. We have some of our more security-oriented establishments where regionally enabled hiring is just a no-go. And so I would say, in terms of where you are, don't I guess look to the policies and look to your own organization's operating context, and not just to the prescribed presence on the workplace. which is a direction. It's not even a policy instrument. It's a direction to deputy ministers about how they should be thinking about this in their organizations. But the regional flexibility remains a deputy minister option that I think is underutilized, and it's one that, particularly in terms of recruiting tech workers, where we do continue to have a shortage in the Government of Canada, we're definitely going to be looking to see what flexibilities can be used to make sure we're more regionally inclusive in our hiring, but also we get the talent that we need.
Great, thank you, Lauren. That's really interesting. Some kind of practical tools and examples that can be used to help with government hiring. Was a really insightful contribution, because that wasn't a policy that I was aware of as well. So it's always good to find out these things. We have another question from Candice Mansour, who's asking, how can government departments leverage each other's solutions? Candice has submitted a question that I won't read word for word, if that's all right, but it's about a solution that her department procured, which didn't work out, but other departments have solutions to the problem that she is touching on in business operations. I think we all touched on elements of sharing good practice in the opening comments about working out what works and making sure that it is shared. So perhaps we can use that question as a jumping off point for that. Again, I'll go to Megan first. How do you ensure that happens? What are the structures and the practices and policies that you can put in place to make that happen systematically? Because it's quite a difficult thing to do at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's multiple prongs to it. So again, like we just went through a project where there's quite a bit of appetite within the GC community to kind of get answers, because they're all kind of going through a similar journey. We're all taking on M365. Again, you might not start in the same place, you might not end in the same place, but we all are kind of doing similar work, similar assessments, similar sort of options analyses, and reinventing that thing, or having to go into maybe third parties to ask for additional help for reviews and assessments is difficult. And probably we're wasting cycles and money on some of this work where we can actually just be collaborating more effectively together. And I think there's a few ways that we can probably do that, and we can continue to do this better. But utilizing our sort of GC tools environment or GC exchange environment to kind of ask those questions. My department's working on something like this. Has anyone else? People have to engage. That has to be something we have to be a little bit more involved with to make sure that we're looking at those things. But also, I know my senior level management as well has been very much pushing for making sure we go out in the community and doing lessons learned engagements. So setting those up, sending out, disseminating that information across levels so that everybody, so different departments have opportunities to send their people to hear, and giving it at different levels, not just the high level, kind of like the CIO or your CDO sort of, but at the working level as well, at your management level for change managers. We kind of group them all sort of differently in different presentations. And then there's been quite a few more engagements. I get probably, I would say, 5 different emails a week from different government departments asking for information on what we did as far as our assessments. Is there anything we can borrow on your security assessments? Sometimes you can't, but sometimes you can. And what can you share? Using GC code. What sort of coding language are you using within maybe PowerShell scripting? Like, there's a lot of things we can share on the assessments because we all kind of have to do them. And even if it's not exactly, you can't take it exactly verbatim and utilize it. If there's anything you can take it to save yourself some time and not have to reinvent it. And this is really what it comes down to too. And I think, Elizabeth, you had it there. Don't be afraid to say where you failed. That's so important. Like, not every digital enablement and rolling out is going to go perfectly. It's just absolutely not. At one point, no matter what you do, you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid, and things are going to go well and some things are not. And any of those things that you learn is going to be so crucial to give to another department to say, hey, we fell down here. We didn't think about this. Make sure you put some people on this. Like, it's so big to be able to stand there and not kind of say we have all the answers. It's here's what we learned. This is what worked, and this is really what didn't. And sometimes that can be difficult. I think there's a bit of a change there of not wanting to like tote how great, everything is. But I think at the same time, it's equally important to say, please don't don't do these don't do these mistakes, because we are all government of Canada. We are all pulling from the same purse. We are all public servant. We're all citizens or residents ourselves. We live here, and I think there's a mutual outcome we're all trying to get to really do the best that we can, and meet the expectations of the entire Canadian public. So those things are going to be big, to be able to just really have these honest conversations and finding more ways to have those communications and collaboration. I know our OCIO colleagues have been working on GC Exchange to get more of those forums going, to have more kind of GC-wide collaboration. So really engaging on those. Don't be afraid to ask even your own, manager or executives, hey, do you know anybody in another department who might know something about this? Can we engage with them? Can you do introductions? Don't be afraid to network. Get involved in like things like Excel Gov, other sort of conferences and engagements, network, ask questions. When you see the badge and you're like, oh, that person works sort of in a similar, space as me. Hi, you guys working on anything like this? We're having issues and challenges. It's so beneficial to me, and we've been really leveraging those kind of pieces. So that's the best advice I can really give from my perspective, but I'm sure Elizabeth and Lauren have more.
Great, thank you, Megan. And one of the things that it's great from my perspective as somebody who's really interested in public policy is having these conversations and being able to facilitate these that type of sharing at events such as this one, and indeed at Accelerate Gov. So yes, I would of course echo Megan's point there about yes, please do get involved in all these kind of events, and do share your information. I'm also going to look up GC Exchange and find out a little bit more about that, because this is not like so many of the things we've discussed today, not a problem that is unique to the government of Canada. A lot of governments have problems in sharing this information and the best practice. Elizabeth, you touched on in your presentation some kind of lessons learned from the work that you had done in government, and I thought that was really good. So perhaps you can maybe let us in a little bit on how that was compiled, and how you kind of promulgate the lessons that came from that work across interested parties.
So kind of going back to the work we did with Dr. Jonathan Kraft and the case studies, which I promised I'll put it in the chat here. It's posted on Open Government. With these studies, and I was very fortunate because I secured support right up to the deputy minister, right up to the departmental audit committee. And I was also in a very privileged position. I was in front of management all of the time, reporting. I think in the first week I was there on my own, new CIO. Everybody else was on vacation, and I'm presenting a dashboard that was mostly red. And all I could say is, here's where we are right now. I commit to you to make it better, right? And I'll come back. So in this case for us, I'm very kind of grateful, because the case studies that Jonathan did, I have colleagues that are still there. We had to pause that project when the pandemic happened, right? That's part of the prioritization. We paused it, and it was restarted after I switched over to SSC. But my colleague that was still there, and she said, Elizabeth, she's like, we went through each case study and we addressed every shortcoming to make sure that it was mitigated or remedied before we started the project. And they finished the project. And I think, the question on, how do you find out about what other departments are doing to leverage theirs? Use your network of networks, like Megan said. I think it's not just the CIO or executives. Go to procurement and say, listen, can you reach out to some of your colleagues and see if they've done anything in this area to maybe make some connection for a coffee chat? Coffee chats are super unimposing, right? There's no commitment. I also love the word pilot. I use it whenever I can. It's time limited. It might fail. That's okay. But I think, don't ever hesitate to reach out and pick up, I don't know what the phone is anymore today, right? But to email folks and connect with folks virtually. to find out what they're doing and how you can solve the problem that you know you have with a different approach and maybe a more economical approach.
And Lauren, do you want to comment on this point too?
Just really quickly, so on this on the original question there about wanting a client services module that some people had, but it wasn't available in the department. But 8 years ago, there was a deputy minister committee on innovation, and they all made lists of all the cool stuff they had in their department, and some had some and some had others. And then the deputy ministers all got together and they said, we challenge you all to turn this on. And there was a great like rah in the deputy minister table. And then 6 months later, nothing had turned on. And people were like, why is this not working? Deputies told you to turn it on. And the really difficult answer that stands between each department and sharing all the good stuff in every other department is that each of us is in a slightly different security environment. Our IT shops are working with different tech stacks, different levels of protection based on how big a target and what types of information your department is handling. And then even within that, each IT shop that actually has to review, even if another department has done a review on a technology, their security profile might not be the same as your department's security profile. This is also why we don't do security clearances, just like as employees move department to department, like rubber stamp for the whole government of Canada. And so within that shop, that team will have to do a review, and they may not have capacity, or they may want to prioritize your project, and there's 72 things ahead of time, and then they've got cutbacks on the staff. So it may be a capacity issue, or it may be that they don't actually have anyone in the shop who's an expert in that tech stack, and then they're going to have to hire a security consultant on the side, and they don't have spare money for that. So my advice, if you want to get good stuff, good toys for your department, is be curious. Go and have real human conversations with the people who are saying no to you and understand the nature of their no. If it's financial, find your own cash, put it in the pot. If it's just they don't understand, you do the research, find out who else has it, who can come in and do coffee chats. But be curious and be helpful. Don't assume that it's just old bureaucracy for the sake of old bureaucracy that's holding us back. Yeah.
Great, and thank you. And we have a question here that I'm going to put to Elizabeth in the first instance, and then please do raise your hand, Megan and Lauren, if you want to join in afterwards, because you just mentioned pilots there, Elizabeth, and we have a question here on how do we balance innovation and testing of new technologies such as AI with the responsibility to protect confidential data and information. Are there opportunities for public servants to sandbox new technologies in a way that are safe and responsible? And because you mentioned the pilots there and doing things that might have a risk of failure, but being willing to take that risk and understand it in a safe way, I wanted to get your thoughts on perhaps what are the best structures and mechanisms to make change happen.
So great question, and there's not a silver bullet, right? There is not one unified question that's gonna help, or a recipe that's gonna help in all cases. But I think it goes back to finding support. So if you can start small and increment, especially when it comes to something as unknown as people feel about AI, and look at how you can mitigate the concerns, like find out and truly appreciate the concerns of what might be impeding it. Is it money? Is it data? Is it security? And how can you start small and build that sandbox? And I appreciate Lauren's comment about, organizations and how we have different security needs across. At the same time, I wonder, why don't we have more GC sandboxes? Why don't we have something where we're not going to put real data in there? It's going to be fake data, but we're going to give space for people to play with it, right? And I know, it's probably, I'm sure that's a great headline, public servants playing in the sandbox, but this is how we learn. It's that experiential learning that people are curious for, and that they want to be curious to understand and learn. So I think never hesitate. Look at, maybe you have an idea there. Maybe you look to see how can either you start a small sandbox that's contained internally to your department, or how do you partner with somebody else and, find a space to do that. And again, making sure that those controls are respected around it. Because if we don't follow policies and processes and maintain that confidence that we're entrusted in as a government, trust is really, really hard to build, but very easy to break. And so it puts more pressure on us when we're trying to do this. But if we follow within those guidelines, that's the assurances that we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and particularly that point about trust, I think is a vital one, and that leads into my kind of follow on from that question, which I'll put to perhaps Lauren first, and then Megan, which is, I was at a UK government event recently, where a very senior digital or somebody working in the DDAT profession in one of the government departments said that the phrase that she found herself using a lot was pilot purgatory, where something was being piloted, but they couldn't get the buy-in, the organizational buy-in, to move from piloting it to rolling it out widespread in an organization, and that was in fact the barrier, was that they'd done lots of things in those sandboxes, but moving them out of the sandboxes into the whole park, as it were, to extend the metaphor, was something they were struggling to do, because that was when the risk appetite, the lack of risk appetite, kind of reared its head again. I wondered, Lauren, given your previous comments on the kind of different technology stacks and the kind of the infrastructure aspects of perhaps trying to do things differently, whether you have any thoughts on how to move from pilots to kind of business as usual, and if there are systemic barriers to that.
Yeah, so go off script here a little bit. We do a garden every year. My husband dutifully grows the little baby tomatoes in the house, and the first year we did that, I took a whole tray of them outside, and I thought, oh, they'll love the sunshine, and they all died on the first day. I didn't know that you needed to basically give them a chance to get used to the sun and bring them back in, and give them a chance to get used to the sun and bring them back in. Basically, I had no understanding about a viable migration path from one ecosystem to another. I think this happens with technology as well. I think the people who very often run the technology too are a little bit distanced from those who have the big ideas that they're trying to use the technology to solve. And so everybody has these sort of grand plans, but we don't actually think about how is so I run a project that started as a 3-year research experiment and is now a full-scale version, like announced by the minister. And that transition was really, really difficult. And surviving that transition meant that we had to have a plan for not only how do we sell people on it, but how will it actually function, all the way down to the details of the security piece, but also at the deputy minister table, did they understand the opportunity cost of not going forward, right? We calculate risk because there's always a sort of perception that staying still is safe and doing different is risky. I think when it comes to technology, people have more success when they talk at deputy minister tables about things like tech debt, aging infrastructure, legacy being left behind, and really making people understand that standing still is not an option when it comes to technology. But the flip side of that burden is that you can't just pitch it at the table, and you can't just sell deputies on this migration plan if you don't actually walk all the way to the end of the line and understand what the barriers are going to be for that technology as it moves forward. We've had so many failed projects in the past that have tried to move from pilot to scale and been colossal failures, that I think there is a distrust at that senior table about letting things out of the pilot sandbox because they've been burned in the past. So the burden of proof is on us to show them that not only is it going to be a good idea, but it's also going to be a sustainable idea. Like, basically, don't fry the tomato plants.
That's really interesting, and where that burden of proof lies. And yes, sorry about your tomatoes. Maybe next year will be better. Megan, I'll come to you for perhaps a final thought on this topic as well.
Yeah.
And then I fear we're up against time.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like, this is really my bread and butter every day. I mean, has always been the resident naysayers historically over time of thou shalt not do this and you must save here. And so we definitely, I think we've really pivoted, honestly, quite honestly, into digital enablement. And I think really I consider myself a risk mitigator more than anything. And it's really my best advice is you have to brief up and brief honestly about the outcomes and what the benefits are. Don't overpromise. Sometimes we've done that with automation. We're like, this will save up this much time. And then when it doesn't, you're like, well, this is a failure. You're like, well, it's not a failure. We just didn't outline maybe the benefits so well. But at the same time, also understanding the risk. To Lauren's point, I've worked in security agencies before. Working for immigration is not the same as working for IRCC, is not working for TBS, is not the same as working for GAC, is not the same. It's all different information and real concerns there. And we want to be innovative, but we want to make sure we're being good stewards of our information and data. And so finding that mix and making sure we're really outlining our risks and being honest about those and finding solutions around it, because saying no really isn't an option. I can tell you from IM, if you don't make it easy, they will find a way around you and they'll make it worse. So you have to find a way to enable and risk mitigate to the best of your ability. Otherwise, we're not going to get to a good place. So that's really why we've had to pivot. But there are ways to do this. But really honesty, good assessment, good people who can think about these things. The why, right? What are we solving? The why. What are the issues if we don't move, and the risks if we don't move, and what are the risks when we do, and how do we kind of mitigate those things, and we can learn from each other to do that. So those are my kind of final thoughts. I could talk about that for all day, honestly, but yeah, it was a great question.
Yeah, that's a great point. Doing nothing is also a policy choice, and yeah, if you
Exactly.
tell people that they can't do something, they might go and do it anyway in a way that is less than
You
optimal. I
have
think
to.
that's a very good reflection. Yeah, thank you everybody. I think that's been a fascinating session. I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's a great kind of staging post for the conversations that we will have at Accelerate Gov. So I'm just going to draw the session to a close there. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to everybody for watching along and for submitting the questions. Apologies, I didn't quite get to all of them, but we got to a good number. As you can see, we will indeed continue this conversation at Accelerate Gov, which is on the 21st of October this year in Ottawa. Please do register. Registrations are open for Accelerate Gov. I think this has been a great appetite whetter for the type of conversations that we will have at the conference. So yeah, please do register for Accelerate Gov. And just final thoughts from me to say thank you to everybody for watching along. Thank you to our panel for joining us. And yes, I very much look forward to continuing this conversation at Accelerate Gov. Thank you, everyone.